Was Charles III richer than Elizabeth II? The unexpected answer. When Queen Elizabeth II died in 2022, Britain not only lost a national icon, but also opened a new chapter of curiosity. What was actually passed on to her successor, King Charles III? Not just the throne, the fame, or the ceremonial power, but also a huge fortune. But from there, the question began to butterfly run. Was Charles richer than his great mother? It sounds simple. Mother left a fortune, inheritance. But here we are not talking about ordinary inheritance. This is the story of one of the oldest and most mysterious families in the world, where the fortune is not just money, but also history, power, law, and even the privileges reserved for royalty. When Queen Elizabeth II dies in 2022, the world will say goodbye to more than just a monarch. It will say goodbye to the last living symbol of an ancient, breezy, and mysterious Britain. She was not only the longest reigning monarch in British history, but also one of the richest and most powerful women in the modern world. At the time of her death, independent financial reports and analyses estimated Elizabeth II's personal fortune at around £370 million, or nearly $500 million. That's a staggering amount, but, and here's the kicker, it's just the tip of the iceberg of what's known as royal wealth. Because what she owns is, unlike any millionaire or billionaire in the world, she doesn't have money, she has history. Every object, every property, every jewel in her hand carries a story that spans hundreds of years. Whispers from the Victorians, Edwardians, and even her own reign. In the list of her few personal possessions, the two most frequently mentioned are Balmoral and Sandringham. Balmoral, nestled in the majestic Scottish Highlands, is where she returns every summer, where she can be herself, away from ceremony and politics. It is so peaceful. She chose it as the place to leave this life. And Sandringham, the historic estate in Norfolk, is where she spends Christmas with her family, where she creates the warmest and most private memories of a queen's life. Both of these places, unlike palaces like Buckingham or Windsor, are personal assets owned by her, not part of the crown's assets. This means she has the right to inherit, sell, and give away, just like any citizen, though that has never happened. But no real estate. Elizabeth II also owns one of the largest and most valuable collections of royal jewelry in the world. Diamonds, emeralds, rubies, and opals from across the empire. Many of the pieces date back to the earliest days, like Queen Victoria and Queen Alexandra. Some have seen kings ascend to the throne and kingdoms fall, and still sit in glass cases with 24/7 security. And then there's a quieter, but perhaps even more historically valuable, treasure trove, the Royal Philatelic Collection. It's the largest, oldest, and most valuable stamp collection on the planet, featuring thousands of rare stamps from every corner of the globe. Many of the flaws remain in the only version, preserved in absolute condition. Someone once said, if the entire collection were put up for auction, the proceeds would be enough to buy a small country. In addition to her visible, tangible assets, the Queen also has regular sources of passive income, most notably from the Duchy of Lancaster, a vast land and real estate that has been a royal asset since the 13th century. This fund brings her millions of pounds each year, the only source of personal income that she has the right to do for herself. However, there is an invisible but extremely important boundary here. That is, not all of the assets she holds are personal according to financial law. Many of the assets that are allocated to her, such as Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, the Crown Estate, or the Royal Collection, are actually assets of the United Kingdom, temporarily vested in the sovereign. She has the right to use, live in, hold ceremonies, receive heads of state, display works of art, but not to sell, mortgage, or use them for personal gain. In other words, she is the owner, but not entirely. She is the custodian, but only for the time that they are valid. And when she dies, those assets pass immediately to her successor, without a will, without a dispute, without taxes. This distinction should clarify the strange nature of the British royal estate, half public, half monthly, half historical, half financial. And it is the declaration that explains why, when comparing Elizabeth II and Charles III in terms of assets, one cannot just look at the numbers. Because part of the fortune she kept, she couldn't leave to her children as she wished. And part of what she left, it may have been quietly valuing for years without the public knowing. And when she died, Charles was not only crowned, but a whole host of assets, investments, holdings, art, and land also passed to him. But what's shocking is this. Less than 3 years after ascending the throne, King Charles III's personal fortune far exceeded the Queen's when she was alive. Many sources estimate it to be in excess of $800 million, perhaps even approaching $1 billion if you include all of her holdings, art collections, stamps, cars, racehorses, and the profits from her private land holdings. How could that be? First, Charles was a better financial manager than many people think. In the public eye, Charles was once seen as a prince who lived in luxury, was attached to royal ceremonies, was sometimes clumsy in the media, and was not very prominent compared to his mother. But few people know that, during more than 50 years as Prince of Wales, he quietly built a separate financial empire and operated it like a real businessman, not inferior to any billionaire on Wall Street or the City of London. The heart of this empire is the Duchy of Cornwall, an ancient land fund established in the 14th century to generate income for the heir to the throne. When Charles took over, the duchy owned hundreds of properties across the UK, from farms, forests, residential areas, to shopping centers, restaurants, tourist areas, and even golf courses. But what is worth mentioning is, instead of just sitting back and enjoying the benefits like previous princes, Charles completely changed the way the duchy operates. He reorganized the executive apparatus as a professional corporation, introduced a long-term investment strategy, and established sustainable development models. He was particularly interested in renewable energy. The duchy invested in solar power projects, wind farms, biomass, rainwater harvesting, and even renovated old buildings to save energy. In terms of real estate, he did not simply hold land, but developed it strategically. He turned wasteland into model ecological residential areas, built houses in traditional and modern architecture, integrated parks, community areas, and a sustainable village model. The most prominent project was the town of Poundbury in Dorset, where Charles tested his vision of an environmentally friendly, self-sufficient urban area, attracting thousands of residents. The duchy's profits not only increased, but doubled during his tenure, from about £10 million a year to more than £24 million before he ascended the throne. And most notably, all of that profit does not come from taxpayers' money, but from the business performance of this land fund. Not only that, Charles also established charities, social investment funds, called for funding and public-private partnerships, and expanded his network of partners in Europe, Asia, and Africa. What he built during his time as Crown Prince is now considered a model blueprint for new-style royal development, a blend of tradition and entrepreneurship. For this reason, when he became king, many financial experts were not surprised when Charles quickly rose to the top of the list of Europe's richest monarchs. He was not just an heir, he was also an enricher of the throne. Second, when Queen Elizabeth II passed away, her entire personal fortune, including the most precious jewels in the royal treasury, was transferred almost intact to Charles. Among them, it is impossible not to mention the two biggest gems, Sandringham House and Balmoral Castle. These two ancient residences are not only the royal family's vacation homes, but also symbols of privacy, tradition, and power. Both of these properties are personal assets, not included in the royal property of the United Kingdom, but belong entirely to the Windsor family. Therefore, when she died, Charles not only inherited the throne, but also inherited huge spiritual and financial assets, with a total estimated value of nearly £500 million just for the two estates and related assets. But the controversy lies not in the numbers, but in the special inheritance mechanism reserved for the king. When an ordinary British citizen inherits property from their parents, they are forced to pay up to 40% inheritance tax. But as Charles is the direct heir to the throne, he is exempt from inheritance tax thanks to a special agreement passed in 1993. That means the Queen's entire fortune, worth hundreds of millions of pounds, passes to Charles without a penny being lost in tax. This, to many, is unfair, but to the royal family, they see it as a measure to protect the integrity of the royal estate, because if taxed at 40%, the royal estate could be divided up, sold off to pay tax debts, and thus lose its symbolic value for centuries. However, many British people feel that this is a feudal privilege left over in the modern democratic era. And that is just the tip of the iceberg, because Charles also inherited the world's largest collection of royal stamps, a cultural treasure that his grandfather, King George V, initiated and collected for decades. This collection is not in a museum, nor is it on public display, but is kept in a private room in St. James's Palace, tightly controlled by the royal family's own preservation team. It includes stamps so rare that someone once offered tens of millions of pounds for a single one, only to be turned down outright. Stamps that were misprinted, never issued, or only one copy in existence, all of which are in Charles' collection. How much is this collection worth? No one can put an exact value on it, but many experts say that if it were put up for auction, it could exceed the value of the entire National Museum. And that's not all. Charles also owns collections of antiques, art, sculpture, vintage cars, and even thoroughbred racehorses, cultural heritage assets combined with a huge financial fortune. There are gifts from heads of state, precious works of art by British classical artists, and one-off Rolls-Royces ever made for the royal family. The remarkable thing is, he doesn't just let it all hang out. Charles doesn't hold on to his wealth passively. He rents out properties for film sets, conferences, and luxury weddings, and even opens up part of his palace to paying tourists. He renovates properties to increase their value, converts farmland into organic farming models, and expands commercial lease lines in strategic areas, all with a business-like management process. And so, less than 3 years after ascending the throne, Charles is officially ranked among the richest people in Britain, not just because of his inheritance, but because of his ability to leverage and develop the royal fortune into a constantly profitable machine. In terms of personal assets, King Charles III is now the richest monarch in modern British history, but what confuses people is not the amount of assets, but how Charles uses them. Because despite being the owner of hundreds of millions of pounds, this king lives in a style that is considered frugal to the point of unbelievable. When he moved into Clarence House, instead of ordering all new furniture, Charles simply changed the color of the old curtains to match the paint. In many formal ceremonies, he wore the same ceremonial clothes from his time as prince: robes, badges, even old leather shoes that were repaired. He was often mocked by the tabloids for wearing the same outfit at international events. Even his personal interests are selectively popular. Charles grows vegetables, tends a garden, is a part-time vegetarian, and once shared that he doesn't like to throw anything away if it still works. He once wore an old watch from his father's time, not because it was rare, but simply because it still worked. So the big question is, what's the point of being so rich if he himself lives like a frugal person? However, in an era of increasingly obvious social injustice, when the British people are facing soaring electricity and gas prices, public budget cuts, pension cuts, and rising university tuition fees, the fact that someone who owns nearly £1 billion is still completely exempt from inheritance tax will, of course, cause controversy. Charles's silence on questions about inheritance tax and the financial transparency of the royal family has made many people feel that it is unfair, especially when the national budget still spends hundreds of millions of pounds each year to maintain the activities of royal members, including the cost of protection, palace renovation, ceremonies, and logistics. So is it fair that the people have to pay taxes on every little thing, while the king inherits everything for free? This is a painful question, and the reason why many British people, although they still respect the king, have begun to question the true role of the monarchy in modern society. Whether you love or hate the monarchy, whether you see Charles as a symbol of preservation or a relic of a bygone era, one thing is undeniable. He has surpassed his mother, not just in the throne, but also in wealth. But surpassing her in wealth Does that mean he will surpass the trust that Elizabeth II once had? The answer, perhaps, only time will tell. Only time will tell. Only time.